Some heartbreaks don't explode, they fade quietly. Like a road you were supposed to walk with someone but ended up traveling alone. This video tells the story of two people in Denmark who almost made it, almost chose each other, almost became a we. But life pushed them in different directions, leaving a trail of unanswered questions. For the next 20 minutes, we'll walk back to that crossroads and see where the untaken road might have led. When two roads met. Picture this. You're walking through a damp Danish afternoon. The kind where the sky looks like someone forgot to turn the emotions back on. The cold nips at your fingers, the air tastes like rain, and the world feels strangely quiet. Then suddenly someone appears. No warning, no dramatic music, just a person standing exactly where your path happens to be. And somehow, without knowing why, your life tilts a little. The funny thing is, you rarely notice the important moment while it's happening. Your brain only sends the memo long after your heart has already taken the hit. I met them on a street in Odense, where the houses looked like they were borrowed from a Hans Christian Andersen story. It wasn't glamorous. They asked for directions. I didn't know the directions. Denmark at that time was basically an infinite loop of street names my tongue couldn't pronounce and winds that slapped harder than reality. Still, I tried to help, pointing left, then right, then left again until we both laughed at how lost we clearly were. That was the first minute we walked together. Awkward, accidental, but together there's a quirky little mechanism in the human brain. When you meet someone who makes you feel safe, oxytocin rises just a bit. Not enough to notice, but enough to make you remember their voice longer than you should. And right on cue that night I kept hearing their soft "thank you" replaying in my head, like an echo that didn't know how to stop. Feelings often begin exactly like that. Quietly, irrationally, without permission. No fireworks. No big signs. Just a look that makes you unsure whether to look back or look away. And so, like two roads running parallel until fate nudges them into the same intersection, we started a small piece of a journey. One I didn't know would matter this much later. Looking back, that meeting became the beginning of all the regret, wonder, and what if that followed. A soft collision of timing and coincidence. Powerful enough to shift something inside me, but not powerful enough to hold us together in the end. The slow bloom. There's something strangely beautiful about how feelings grow in cold countries. Maybe it's the way people move slower, speak softer, or carry warmth like a secret they're scared to lose. Whatever the reason, what happened between us didn't explode into existence. It unfolded cautiously like spring in Denmark. Late, hesitant, and unbelievably tender when it finally arrived. At first, it was nothing dramatic. Just small rituals that didn't feel like rituals yet. Walking to the same bakery on accidental Mondays. Sending each other photos of sunsets that weren't even that impressive. Sharing inside jokes that honestly weren't that funny, but felt hilarious because they belonged only to us. The kind of slow, steady connection the brain loves. Predictable enough to feel safe, surprising enough to feel alive. Psychologists say that when two people repeatedly show up in each other's lives, the brain starts merging them into its emotional reference system. In simple terms, their presence becomes part of your internal weather. And without even noticing, they become the reason some days feel less gray. That's exactly what happened. They didn't change my life, but they made my life feel softer. And softness in a world this harsh is its own kind of miracle. What startled me most was how natural everything felt. There was no overthinking, no rehearsed lines, no pressure. Just two people walking along riversides where ducks floated like they had nowhere better to be. or sitting in cafes that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and rain-soaked jackets. Sometimes we talked for hours, sometimes we didn't talk at all. And the silence wasn't awkward, it was the kind of silence where your nervous system finally gets to take a nap. But here's the funny trick the universe likes to play. When something grows slowly, you don't realize how deep it's gotten until one day you feel it all at once. Like waking up and suddenly noticing the ocean was rising this whole time. At some point, I still don't know when, the way they said my name began to matter. The way they looked at me lasted 1 second too long. The way my chest tightened when their hand brushed mine felt like a warning label I didn't read in time. And maybe that's the danger of slow love. It doesn't knock on your door. It builds a home inside you quietly. By the time you notice the construction, you've already moved in. Looking back, I think both of us sensed the bloom. But sensing something and admitting it out loud? Those are two separate roads. And neither of us was brave enough to choose the honest one yet. Cracks under the surface. Some relationships don't break with a sound. They fracture quietly, like ice under your feet long before it finally gives way. That's how it was with us. If someone had watched from the outside, they would have said everything looked fine. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Things can look whole long after they've already started to split. The first cracks showed up in tiny moments. A message seen but not replied to right away. A hesitation before agreeing to meet. A smile that didn't reach the eyes. Nothing dramatic. Just small shifts in tone. Like someone gently lowering the volume on a song you didn't realize you were listening to. The brain is excellent at ignoring evidence that threatens what it loves, so you tell yourself it's nothing. You invent excuses for them, for yourself, for the silence. But excuses are like duct tape on a sinking boat. They only delay the inevitable. There was one evening I still remember too clearly. We were sitting near the harbor in Aarhus, watching the lights ripple on the water. It should have been peaceful, but something felt off. They were there beside me, but their attention kept drifting somewhere I couldn't follow. It was like talking to someone whose soul was already halfway out the door. I tried to laugh, to ask questions, to anchor the moment, but every answer felt thinner, quieter, like they were speaking from behind a curtain. Psychologists say humans can sense emotional withdrawal before it's consciously processed. Micro-expressions, changes in breathing, reduced eye contact. Your nervous system picks up the danger before your mind names it. That's exactly what happened. My chest tightened even though nothing bad had happened. My instincts whispered a truth I didn't want to hear. We were beginning to lose each other. But instead of facing it, both of us did what scared people do. We pretended. We pretended that stress was the problem. We pretended that timing was complicated. We pretended that nothing had changed. It's almost funny how two people can be hurting in the same direction but stay silent because they're terrified of confirming their worst fear. The truth was simpler and darker. Our feelings had grown faster than our ability to handle them. We cared, maybe too much, maybe too intensely. And when something matters that deeply, the fear of losing it becomes a third person in the relationship. A silent, jealous ghost sitting between you on every bench, every cafe table, every walk home. And once fear enters quietly, love starts shrinking quietly too. Deep down, I think we both felt the beginning of the end long before the end arrived. But neither of us had the courage to say, "Something's wrong." So the cracks kept growing beneath our feet, waiting for the moment they would finally break open. The unspoken choice. There's a strange kind of silence that doesn't feel calm. It feels like standing at a train station where the train hasn't arrived yet, but somehow you already hear the departure whistle. That was the silence between us. Not loud, not sharp, just heavy. The kind that makes your lungs work harder for no reason. What made it worse is that nothing dramatic happened. No fight. No betrayal. No slammed doors. Just a gradual drifting, like two boats tied to the same dock but slowly loosening their ropes without meaning to. People think relationships end with a moment, a word, an argument, a mistake. But sometimes they end with a choice no one says out loud. A choice both people sense but neither wants to acknowledge. I remember the day the choice formed. Not spoken, not agreed upon, but undeniably present. We were walking along the lakes in Copenhagen. The water flat like polished glass. The air almost too still. Their hand brushed mine, a touch that used to feel electric, but this time it felt uncertain, like they were testing whether holding on would hurt more than letting go. Our conversation that day was normal. That was the worst part. Normal in the way people talk when everything underneath is falling apart but both are too gentle, or too scared to disturb the surface. We discuss work, whether a restaurant they wanted to try. The words were fine, but the tone carried something fragile, something neither of us could hide. The quiet realization that the road we were on might not be a shared one much longer. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance collapse. The moment the brain stops fighting the truth because the evidence has piled too high. You feel it as a heaviness in the ribs. A sudden clarity you didn't ask for. And that day, clarity hit me harder than the Danish wind ever had. We paused at a bridge, and for a moment everything felt suspended. Like the universe was waiting to see which road we'd choose. And in that stillness, something inside me understood. If one of us didn't speak, didn't fight, didn't reach out, the story would end right there in the space between heartbeats. The tragedy is that both of us waited for the other to make a move. And waiting is its own kind of choosing. No words were spoken. None needed to be. The decision wasn't voiced, but it was made. Not through logic or argument, but through silence. A soft, devastating surrender disguised as mutual politeness. That was the moment we stopped being almost. The moment the road forked, quietly, without a map, without permission, and neither of us was brave enough to step onto the same path. Where we finally broke. There's a moment in every almost love story when something tiny happens, so tiny you'd miss it if you blinked. Yet it becomes the quiet point of no return. For us, that moment arrived on a day that should have been ordinary. A Sunday. Soft light. Coffee that tasted slightly burnt. Nothing in the scene screamed tragedy, but everything underneath whispered it. We had agreed to meet at a small cafe near the canals, the kind with mismatched chairs and pastries that always sold out too early. I arrived first. They arrived late. Not dramatically late, just enough to signal that their mind had been elsewhere. When they sat down, the first thing I noticed wasn't their smile, but how tired their eyes looked. Tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Tired in a way people get when they're carrying something they don't know how to say. We talked, but the conversation kept slipping through our fingers like water. Every sentence came wrapped in hesitation. Every laugh was half-hearted. Their gaze drifted, returning to me only when I spoke, as if they were trying to be present but couldn't keep both feet in the moment. And here's the cruel thing. Love can survive anger, distance, even mistakes, but it struggles to survive uncertainty. The human brain hates ambiguity. It interprets it as danger. So while they talked about their week, My heartbeat tapped out a warning I didn't want to acknowledge. There was one sentence, simple, harmless, that broke something loose inside me. They said, "I don't know what I want right now." Just that. Not dramatic. Not emotional. But when someone you care for says they don't know if there's room for you in their future, the world doesn't need to end loudly. It ends in the soft collapse of everything you were secretly hoping for. I nodded. I said I understood. Humans are good at pretending to be strong while quietly bleeding on the inside. And instead of asking them to stay, instead of telling them that losing them felt like being pushed off an edge in slow motion, I chose the easier, weaker path. I mirrored their uncertainty. It's strange how two people who once moved toward each other so naturally can suddenly become experts at stepping back. When we walked out of the cafe, the city was calm, almost serene. Bikes passed by, kids laughed, the canal glowed with late afternoon light, as if the world had no idea something was ending right there on that cobblestone street. We hugged goodbye, a little too long, a little too gentle, the kind of hug that aches because you know it's trying to say 4 sentences neither of you is brave enough to speak. That was the last time we met. Not because we planned it that way, but because sometimes the end doesn't slam the door, it just quietly refuses to open again. The road I couldn't take. There's a strange thing that happens after someone leaves your life without really leaving a clear reason. Your mind keeps walking down the road where they're still beside you. It doesn't matter how logical you are. The moment a connection ends in uncertainty, the brain becomes a professional screenwriter, replaying every scene, rewriting every line, asking questions that have no audience and no answers. That's what grief does. It forces you to imagine versions of reality that never happened. For weeks, maybe months, Denmark felt different. The same streets we once walked suddenly looked too wide. The same cafes sounded too loud. Even the wind, the same annoying wind I used to joke about, started feeling like it was pushing me toward memories I wasn't ready to revisit. That's the problem with an almost relationship. You don't just lose a person, you lose the future you quietly built with them in your head. Neurologists explain this with something called counterfactual thinking, the brain's tendency to obsess over what could have been. It's the mental equivalent of trying to open a door that isn't there anymore. Your mind keeps reaching for something that has already slipped out of your hands. And every time I passed a spot we shared, the bridge, the bakery, the lake where our silence first cracked, my brain whispered one sentence I couldn't silence. That road could have been ours. I kept wondering what would have happened if I had spoken up sooner. If I'd said, "Don't pull away," or "I want this," or simply, "Stay." But the thing about regret is that it always arrives late to the party, dressed like wisdom. It tells you all the things you should have done, while completely ignoring the fact that you were doing your best with the heart you had at the time. Some nights I imagined a version of us where fear didn't win, where we confronted the silence instead of drowning in it, where they chose me fully and I chose them fully, and the roads that split could somehow twist back together. I pictured a future in Copenhagen. Shared breakfasts, shared winters, shared everything. I imagined traveling together, arguing about silly things, building inside jokes that only made sense to us. It wasn't fantasy, it was the life that almost existed. But the painful truth is this. Some roads stay untaken not because they were wrong, but because both people were too scared to walk them. Love requires 2 brave souls. We only had 1.5. Still, even now, when I think back to that version of the road, the one glowing softly in the what if, I don't feel anger. I feel something quieter. A tender ache. a gratitude wrapped in loss. Because even though that road didn't become ours, it showed me a version of myself capable of loving deeply, softly, and honestly. And sometimes that's the road that ends up mattering the most. The question that never left. Maria sits by the window that night, the moonlight touching her face like a reminder she didn't ask for. She replays Jonas' words in her mind. Not the ones he said, but the ones he didn't. The silence between two people who once loved each other doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, like something that's still alive but trying not to breathe too loudly. Jonas, meanwhile, lies awake with a question that keeps stabbing at the edges of his thoughts. If I had stayed, would we have survived? He knows it's pointless. He knows the past can't be rewritten. But some connections don't respect time. They return uninvited, like a truth you tried to bury. Both of them are living different lives now, surrounded by different people, but their hearts make the same quiet confession in the dark. I wasn't done with you. A week passes before fate decides to play its quiet game again. Jonas is walking through the Saturday market, hands in his pockets, trying to look like someone who has moved on. The air smells like fresh bread in early winter, the kind of cold that wakes memories you didn't mean to remember. On the other side of the market, Maria is choosing flowers, something simple, something white. She looks tired, like someone who has been pretending to be fine for too many days in a row. They are only 20 steps apart. 20 steps from a moment that could change everything. Or nothing at all. Jonas pauses in front of a stall, sensing something he can't name. A strange pull in his chest. Familiar, unwanted, irresistible. Maria lifts her head at the same time, as if hearing a voice no one else heard. For a split second, their paths align, but a group of tourists passes between them, loud and clumsy, breaking the invisible thread. Maria turns left. Jonas turns right. Two hearts still orbiting each other, but never crossing. The universe sighs. It will have to try again. The message that stopped mid-sentence. That night, Jonas sits at his desk, the glow of his phone the only light in the room. He types a message to Maria. Something simple, something safe. I hope you're doing okay. But he doesn't hit send. His thumb hovers over the screen. He imagines her reading it, ignoring it, overthinking it, deleting it, or worse, replying with something polite, distant, cold. The kind of message that tells you the door is closed but not locked, just never opened again. So he deletes the sentence. Starts a new one. I saw someone today who looked like you. Erase. Another attempt. Do you still think about us? Erase. The truth sits heavy on his chest. He isn't afraid she's moved on, that he's afraid she hasn't. Just like him across the city, Maria is staring at her own phone, her fingers tracing an unsent message of her own. I miss the person we were together. But she, too, erases it before it becomes real. 2 screens, 2 hearts, 2 confessions that never leave the draft folder. Weeks pass, but the memory of their time together refuses to fade. Jonas walks along the canals of Copenhagen at dusk, where the reflection of the winter sun paints the water gold and silver, and every ripple feels like a page from their story. He remembers the laughter, the quiet touches, the way Maria's eyes caught the light just right when she smiled. It's vivid, almost painfully so, like a photograph pressed against his chest. Maria, in her apartment, lights a candle in the evening chill. The flame flickers, casting shadows that remind her of a hand she used to hold, a shoulder she used to lean on. She remembers the smell of the bakery where they shared croissants, The sound of the wind in the narrow streets, the warmth of his scarf around her fingers. The world moves on, but the small details of him remain. Psychologists call this emotional imprinting, when certain experiences carve so deeply into memory that even time doesn't erase them. Every canal, every corner of the city, every small gesture becomes a ghost of what could have been. It's bittersweet. The ache is a reminder that love was real, even if it couldn't survive. And yet, in that ache there's also a lesson. That winter light, fleeting and cold, reminds them that beauty exists even in endings. That love can leave without taking everything. That memory, though painful, is a quiet companion, a way to honor what once was without trapping yourself entirely in it. Jonas pauses on a bridge, looking out over the glimmering water, and whispers to himself, "We were real. And that's enough." Maria does the same somewhere across the city. We were real. And that's enough. The past doesn't demand more than acknowledgement, and in that quiet they begin to forgive themselves and each other. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the ending. It's imagining the road that never happened. The one Jonas and Maria didn't walk together. In the quiet of their separate lives, both of them revisit that fork in the path over and over. What would have happened if fear hadn't held them back? If one of them had been brave enough to step forward, to speak what needed saying? In Denmark, the canals and cobblestones are full of what-ifs. Every winter light on the water reminds Jonas of her smile. Every quiet cafe corner reminds Maria of the warmth he brought to her hands. Psychologists call this counterfactual thinking, imagining the alternate realities that never became real. But sometimes this imagining isn't torture. It's a mirror. It reflects not what they lost, but what they learned about themselves. About love, courage, and timing. They each realize something vital. The road not taken together shaped them in ways the road they did take never could. The almost love taught patience, reflection, and the deep, aching beauty of human connection. And in that realization lies peace, a bittersweet acknowledgement that some roads, no matter how tempting, are meant to be walked alone, as Jonas walks along the frozen canal one last time, and Maria places a candle in her window across the city. Both of them smile softly. Not at each other, not at the past, but at the lesson embedded in the quiet ache. The road they didn't take together still exists, in memory, in imagination, and in the subtle shaping of who they've become. The road not taken together is still a road worth remembering.